Your Life and Sex Island, Chapter 6, The Life and Sex Island, page 192. Continuing our little fairy tale. We are still visiting our little island. This is our Life and Sex Island. You got your high boots on? We're getting closer to getting into it. Trader Mac, one of those successful businessmen that we all admire so much, grasped all of the wealth and power on our island by gaining control of the only source of water, a little artesian spring near the beach that flowed into the ocean, the free spring water. And now he charges whatever he wants for that water. Our islanders became effective slaves because they had to work all of the time to supply themselves and all of Trader Mac's entourage and courtesans. Those people, the islanders, simply did not understand why they had to work and Trader Mac and his hangers-on didn't have to. Those people had class envy. It is not difficult to understand what Trader Mac did. It is what any of us would have done if we had thought of it first, would we not? It is our history. One of the major problems corporations have is to reduce the cost of labor, and then reduce it some more. There is no bottom that is too low, but this is an ancient problem. The best solution is to work people without paying or feeding them. Hitler is definitely not the first or the last to do so. Most corporate executives wish that they could, but would feign outrage at the suggestion that they might like the idea. Some people call it slavery. We've been doing it forever. Slavery was an ancient institution at the time of Hammurabi, about 1760 BC. In 1452, Pope Nicholas V allowed any pagans and other non-believers to be made slaves, which made slavery legal for Catholics, which was all Christians at that time. There's a lot of history between 1492 and 1776, 284 years. That is more than between 1776 and 2010, 234 years. Columbus crammed as many Tano Indians onto his ships as he could and sold them as slaves in Spain in 1495. Other Indians he put to work as slaves in mines and plantations throughout the Caribbean. Slavery was the norm from the Old Testament to the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. Not just in the U.S. South, everywhere in the world. Massachusetts became the first colony to legalize slavery in 1642. New York and New Jersey legalized slavery in 1664. Tsar Alexander II freed 23 million Russian slaves in 1861. Even a Russian Tsar beat us to the punch bowl. Of course, freeing slaves and making people free are two different things. On July 1st, 1863, the Netherlands abolished slavery, freeing an estimated 45,000 slaves, most in Suriname. We could list every country and find that most trended toward officially ending official slavery in that century, the 19th century. Although as recently as the 1950s, our good friend, by way of the Bushies, Saudi Arabia, had an estimated 450,000 slaves. There are still millions of slaves in the world. Many are white or sex slaves. And in case you are interested, Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation freed the slaves, but no laws were passed against slavery. So slavery continued until 1942, when the first slavery conviction finally actually was successful. Until then it was, oh yeah, the slaves are freed. But they weren't, in fact, free. It took Thurgood Marshall to chip away at actual slavery, beginning with his first major victory the year of my birth, 1935. Then he whittled 20 years to finally defeat the devil slavery in 1954. I find it interesting that you and my ancestors were and had slaves, were slaves and were slave owners. Yup. The history is so long, deep, and dignified that it is ridiculous to think that it is anathema to religion or to man. To think that we would not be slavers and that our ancestors were not slavers and slaves is ridiculous. Black, white, red, yellow, or brown. A king just had to lose a battle, and he and all of his supporters were slaves, if they were lucky. If not lucky, they were tortured to death. It is pretty undeniable that if you or I had the chance to have slaves, we would. Not, of course, under today's conditions, under today's enlightenment, people would look down on us. Even George W. Bush doesn't openly advocate actual slavery. He and his buddies just push conditions towards slavery. But if you and I and or Lincoln lived in a situation where slavery was acceptable, and if our lives could be made easier and richer, we would have slaves. If we could absolutely, confidentially get away with it, we would have slaves. We are all Trader Macs given the opportunity. I am just trying to get rid of the idea of good or evil regarding slavery or pro or anti-slavery sentiments. All of the moneyed religions in the antebellum South were pro-slavery and proved that slavery was approved in the Bible. All major religions that I am familiar with loved and still do love slavery. We all try to better ourselves and to better our children's prospects. That sounds so much better than saying we all want to be rich, or at least richer. And indeed, if we are rich, we want to be still richer. There is no acceptable top, and I have never heard of an exception, though I suppose there are some. Now I am almost 3/4 of a century old, and so I am pretty sure that I am not going to be rich. Therefore, I am anti-slavery. I want to be clear. This is not good or evil. This is simply my own self-interest. What works for me, goddammit. If I were Trader Mac or one of his truth fountain poets, I would be pro-slavery. The vast majority of us are never going to be Trader Macs or likely one of his truth fountain poets. Therefore, we should start a conspiracy to limit Trader Mac's wealth and power, knowing, of course, that Trader Mac's truth fountain poets, viz. The think tanks, will damn us with all sorts of damnableness, knowing also that it is not a limitless pie that may be shared with everyone to everyone's benefit, knowing also that if only a few are sharing in the pie, as is the case now, most of the pie will rot and benefit no one, knowing yet again that if a fair share of the pie is given to everyone, there will be far more pie to share. Even the rich will benefit. Well, are we getting into it, you think? Come back with your high boots on. I'll try to continue our journey. Purchase the book by clicking the link in the description below.